SuperTalk Mississippi Media production.
Whether you're looking to start a career with no student loans or change careers to land one of the happiest jobs in the world, yep, that's construction, Build Mississippi can help. Visit buildmississippi.com to learn why a career in the trades deserves another look. Buildmississippi.com. Your future is waiting.
This is Gerard Gibert, and thank you for listening to Middays here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Middays with Gerard Gibert is on the air. Middays with Gerard Gibert is powered by C Spire. Power your home or business with C Spire Fiber. To learn more, visit supertalk.fm/C Spire. C Spire Fiber powers SuperTalk Mississippi. Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. Hello. You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Everyone, and welcome to Middays, SuperTalk Mississippi. I'm your host, Gerard Gibert, along with Rhino in the Element Wealth studio, guiding you through the middle of your day with facts, fodder, and fine music on this
Friday, y'all.
Heck dang yeah, we are here, ready to go. It is a Friday, President Trump's first full week. Watching him on the television and the screen right now, he is in North Carolina, touring the damage from Hurricane Helene.
Is it technically a full week if you started at noon on Monday?
Oh, okay. I'm thinking about the work week. Of course, the guy works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it may not apply in this case.
Some in the local D.C. media have noted that. I haven't seen much mention of it on the mainstream media, but they've mentioned there's a Marine posted outside at 2:30 in the morning.
What's that about?
That signals that the president is in the Oval Office working.
Oh, love it. Absolutely love it.
Because when the president's not there, the Marine doesn't have to be at that post.
Oh, how about that? Do you think that a Marine must also be posted when the president is eating cookies and milk or sleeping? I'm sorry, I had to get that in there because we have endured an entire term, I think, of an AWOL president. Low energy, as President Trump used to say. Wasn't that Jeb Bush's descriptor for Jeb? Low energy Jeb.
Please clap.
That's right. He actually was right about that. Man, we're back at it, though. That is for sure. Yesterday, we got into this discussion of taxes here in the state of Mississippi, tax reform, a top priority, certainly, of the Mississippi House of Representatives. Speaker of the House, Jason White, Chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, Trey Lamar, both of whom have been on our program and also on the Gallo Show. And then yesterday, we had the pleasure of speaking with Chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. That would be the counterpart in the Senate side to the House Ways and Means Committee. And that was Senator Josh Harkins from Rankin County. And so this is a rather interesting, deep and wide debate because, I'm sorry, taxes are just complicated. I wish they weren't, but they are, and we have, through the years, made them even more complicated. But there's a lot of information floating around that is inaccurate, and that's no disrespect to folks who form opinions based on just the high level of information that they avail themselves to. There are a lot of nuance, a lot of complications, and in this particular case, I think, Rhino, it's because It'd be different if it was just a one paragraph, 2 or 3 statement bill that said we're cutting or eliminating the income tax. That'd be pretty straightforward. Everybody could wrap their heads around that. But this is a situation where this HB1 measure phases out the income tax, increases this tax, decreases that tax, changes the way we allocate money to cities, changes the transfer of net proceeds from the Mississippi Lottery Corporation. In other words, there's a lot of features and provisions, timing, all the above, that requires a little time to parse, to analyze, to comprehend. And that's fine. And what we try to do on this program is cut through all that and educate and inform. But I was unable to get to all the texts that we received yesterday on this subject during Senator Harkin's interview. And as we've shared before, and you're well aware of this, Rhino, when you're talking to somebody across from you like that, trying to keep the cadence going and think about the next question while you're comprehending and consuming what they're saying to you, adding another task into that, which sometimes we're able to do, of reading something on the text line and then conveying that, it can be complicated.
Oh, yeah.
And it could unfortunately make for a poor interview. So we got a lot of texts, and the other thing is this was at the end of the show, towards the end of the show, so we didn't have a lot of time to review those. But nonetheless, I screenshot, I linked some of those, stored the link and screenshot, so we could talk about that today. So this is one, if he's listening today, from Greg Ward. And it had to do with the deduction of the monies into the Mississippi College Savings Program. He said that he does contribute to the program for his granddaughter's college education. And he's concerned that he would lose that deduction. And so here's the thing to keep in mind, and along the same lines, somebody also asked about losing the credit, the tax credit for purchase of car tax, automobile tax. And what we've got to keep in mind there is that if this bill were to become law, and thus the income tax were fully eliminated, credits and deductions become irrelevant. There's nothing to credit. There's nothing to deduct against. You don't have any more tax liability. You don't owe any more taxes. So it's not like you need the credits or deductions to reduce the tax bite. You don't have one anymore. It's zero. So I just want to pass that on to make sure that's understood, that they're thus by eliminating the income tax, you're not concerning yourself anymore with what can I deduct, what can I credit, I got to make sure I maximize that. Sure, as long as we have an income tax, you definitely want to do that to minimize your taxes.
Is it too much of a stretch to say that if income tax is eliminated, you just basically have that as the icing on the cake?
As far as what is the icing on the cake? What do you mean?
Well, I mean, you're looking towards that $10,000 or $20,000 tax credit every year. Deduction, excuse me. That's going to be in your bank account. There's no middleman there. There's no worry about, this would be going to the state if not for this.
Well, yeah, so the way to look at that is the savings. Let's say that in current day, state of Mississippi, let's make it easier. It's 2026, okay? Tax year 2026, and the tax rate, we only have one, that's 4% of all taxable income over $10,000. Let's just say your taxable income is $20,000. Only the $10,000 over the $10,000 floor is subject to income tax. So that's $400. $10,000 of taxable income, $400. Let's say that you contribute $10,000, which is the max, to a college savings plan. Now,
for a single filer.
Yeah, for a single filer, $20,000 filing joint. That's right. Now your taxable income is $10,000. You following me on that now? $20,000 is your taxable income. Oh, wait, I'm going to contribute $10,000 to a college savings plan. Now, because you can fully deduct that up to $10,000 as an individual, your taxable income is $10,000. The first $10,000 of taxable income in the state of Mississippi is taxed at 0%. So the difference is I saved $400. Without that contribution, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so the point is without any taxes, it's zero. Everything's zero. So you're not really getting any. You're not losing any benefit, is the way to put that, because you don't have any taxes anymore. There's no incentive from a tax perspective to contribute to that. You're just doing it because you want to save for the education. You're not getting any tax benefit because you're having your taxes eliminated. You don't have any taxes anymore. Same thing with the credit. There's nothing to credit. If you don't owe any taxes, you can't credit against it. So if you're concerned about losing the credit, well, you don't have a tax liability anymore. So the credit's of no value. Good news is you don't have a tax liability anymore. It's now zero. You don't need the credit to get you to zero or a lower tax liability. Coming right back, Ben Milam at 11:20, Douglas Carswell from MCPP at 12:05. This segment of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by Covington County Hospital in Collins, where your health matters.
Check it out. Let's do this.
The talk that keeps Mississippi talking. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Let's get on with it.
On SuperTalk Mississippi.
Great tune there by Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. Wooden Ships. We've talked about that before. Strange lyrics. Still have no idea what they mean. Could have been some shroom-induced composition.
Some sort of chemical.
67, 68? Check me out.
Somewhere around there.
Somewhere around there. Summer of Love, 1967, remember? Man, oh man. We're back. So
February 20th, 1969.
Oh, shoot. Okay. I missed it. Man. Here's another question, and this is a major concern that you hear about tax reform here, is property taxes. Oh, my gosh, they're going to eliminate the income tax. My property taxes are going up. So here's a question. How homeowners pay property taxes for local governments. What about renters? How do they get a little skin in the game? Well, of course, the owner of the property, multifamily housing, for example, or even if it's single-family housing, this rental property, the owners of that property are on file. They're getting a tax bill, and they're paying it. I can assure you they are factoring into the rent you're paying, just like corporate taxes are figured into the prices that corporations charge for their goods. You're paying it indirectly. You don't get a tax bill, but they have skin in the game. They're paying for it. There's absolutely no doubt. It's a good question, though.
And it also brings up the whole unintended consequences or second-order thinking of, well, if you implemented taxes on rent, would you then have to have a carve-out for the rental property owners, or would the property be getting double-dipped on taxes?
I would say...
Because if you then start charging it on rent, do you then drive down the opportunity for someone to get into the business of being a landlord and having rental property? Or, I mean, that's where you get into all these other what ifs, when in reality it's baked in.
Yeah, so as we have pointed out before, it's not the same as property taxes, but sales taxes, a chief source of revenue to state governments. In fact, it's typically the largest source of revenue to state governments, depending on the state. States that have higher tax rates, the lines start to cross at some point. In Mississippi, though, sales taxes produce more revenue to the general fund, to the state, than do income taxes. That's important to point out. In the state of Florida, a state we look at regularly is one that does not have a state income tax. However, they do charge sales taxes on rent, not property taxes, sales taxes.
Correct.
They also have a considerably higher property tax millage, about 1.3 hours, as I recall. I want to say it's like 92, 94 mills relative to our 70-something mills. And then in the state of Texas, man, the property taxes are virtually double what they are here. But there's no income tax, so it's a pick-your-poison deal. But it's a little easier scenario to just kind of deal with mentally because all that's in place. And when folks say, well, other states did it, not really. They haven't done it in a long time. The latest was in the 2010-11 time frame, Kansas. That's one that lawmakers across the country at the state level point to as a failure to eliminate the income tax. It's called the Kansas experiment. Well, that's because they very abruptly ended the income tax, and they really took no other action to generate offsetting new revenue or cost savings by cutting spending. And they had to go back and say, oh, wait, we got to get more money from you. It's a disaster. Florida, Texas, other states, Washington, can't remember all the ones.
Even Florida has walked back the sales tax on rental.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I believe it was 2020 or 2021. They walked it back from 4.7% to 2.5% now.
Okay.
Maybe it's down to 2.
Okay. Well, nonetheless, when you start talking about something as bold, which I fully support, is eliminating the income tax, it's really a bit disingenuous to point to the other states because those systems, those structures have been in place for a long time. You didn't show up and disrupt something. This is very disruptive legislation because of what we talked about in the first segment. You're increasing over here, decreasing over there, changing the way this money gets transferred, increasing the way this. So it just has a lot of provisions that concern people, and I get it, totally.
Also, the other key difference in property tax versus a sales tax on rent. Sales tax on rent, you pay it every month. Property tax, you'd have a random month where your rent's higher.
That's true. That's true, if that were to work. If the law passes, would it be wise to continue to still have the same taken out? It's on the C Spire tax line. For taxes, just transfer that withholding to federal, so we'll be that much more ahead since we are used to be taken out anyway, or is that loaning the federal government your money for a year at no interest?
The second part.
Yeah, it's actually a good question. So just to clarify, you control the withholding. You control it. You're not legally required to have any amount withheld from your paycheck. You can say zero. I've done it before just because I had so many deductions in years where and offsets that I didn't want to loan the government my money. But here's where I'm going with that. If you say zero or you select a withholding that's less than, when added up over the year, the amount when you do your tax return you owe. Okay, I'm not talking about additional owe, a refund. I'm talking about when you compute your tax liability and you have paid in less than that, you are potentially subject to interest and penalties. You got to stay current. So you can say zero, but when you square up and reconcile and do your tax return and you end up owing money to the government, whichever government it is, you're subject to paying a penalty and interest for that.
That's why a majority of people choose to have a withholding that usually exceeds what they owe.
You're right. They don't want to have that situation occur where they get a call or a notice is the way it works from the IRS or the state tax commission says, hey, wait, you underpaid. And because of that, and you underpaid by a certain amount that triggered the penalty and interest. That's the problem. So you're right. A lot of people say, you know what, I don't want that situation. I'll pay more in. And there are
some people that they do all the calculations and try to get that withholding as close to flushed out, balanced out zero as possible.
Right.
But then you have other people that use it like a savings account.
Yeah.
But you're not getting any interest on it. You're just kind of letting it sit there in Uncle Sam's desk until you get it back.
So the other thing, just what I'm thinking about, is property taxes. Because you've seen this, that a common objection is, I'm concerned that if the state government eliminates the income tax, especially from retirees who don't pay any income tax, that I will see my property taxes increased. And so here's something to keep in mind about that. It's the buckets of money, the sources of revenue, and the taxing authorities that receive said revenues. Here's what I mean by that. The state functions on revenues derived from income taxes and sales taxes. Now, there's some others, and use taxes are essentially sales taxes levied on the sale of goods from out of state consumed. And by the way, the term use, Rhino, it's because it's assumed that it's used in the state. You buy it from out of state, you use it in the state. That's where the term use tax comes from. But those three comprise, I think the senator and I did the math yesterday, 70-something% of total general fund revenue, something in that neighborhood. However, property taxes, those fund the operations, the functions of counties, school districts, and cities, municipalities. Totally different buckets of money. The state government derives nothing from property taxes. It relies on income, sales taxes to function. Municipal governments, county and cities, rely on ad valorem taxes, that's property taxes. School districts, ad valorem taxes, property taxes. Look at your property tax bill. You'll see those three categories. County, school district, city. Same deal. So don't conflate that. One does not relate to the other. By the way, we should say, Rhino, those are not inextricably linked. Coming right back.
Gerard Gibert.
Welcome to our shop
on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Okay, now you have a good one.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays. Jimbo in Gluckstadt says his daughter works at Disney, lives in Kissimmee, Florida. The sales tax on her rent is baked into the rent. Yeah, I think that's what you were talking about.
Pay it every month.
The bottom line is there's a sales tax levied on rent that's collected by the state to operate the state. I mean,
and for the average renter, it just computes better to pay a tax on a transaction that you make. Versus all of a sudden, once a year, there's this other transaction I have to make.
Sure. I'm just really pointing out that, first, the tax burden in the state of Mississippi is fairly reasonable relative to the other states. It's not like we have this crazy tax burden that's way up at the top of the list. We're not even close. If you look, you got to look at the overall tax burden. And though I know a lot of folks focus on the 7% sales tax on groceries, which is commonly referred to, and it's correct to do so, as the highest in the country. But our overall sales tax rate is fairly low and lower than all the adjacent states, which come in at an average sales tax rate of 9.5%. If this law were to pass, adding 1.5% to all non-grocery sales, except for the ones that get special treatment, such as cars and farm equipment, so forth, but non-grocery sales would put us at 8.5. That's still 1% less than the neighboring states. Groceries would ultimately terminate down to a full rate of 4%. Start out at 6%, and then decline through the years down to a final rate of 4%, which includes 1.5% for local taxes. That's a new provision. So appreciate that, Jimbo. Yeah, all I'm trying to point out is every state has a different model for collecting revenue. It's just really a function of, philosophically, what would you like to see be the model here in Mississippi? And one of the challenges in eliminating the income tax in Mississippi, of course, is the fact that our retirees' retirement income is not subject to income tax. So they look at the increase of non-grocery items, increase new tax on fuel, reduction of sales taxes on groceries, and again, doing the math as we have on the show, they're looking at it saying, well, it's pretty close to a wash. Maybe I owe a little more. Maybe I get a little benefit. Bottom line is, it's not really changing a lot for me. I think it's within, as I've said before, the average retiree of $100 more you're going to have to pay a year to $100 less, somewhere in that range. And then, of course, there's exceptions to that, and I recognize that. But certainly they wouldn't get the benefit that working people would of elimination of the income tax, because their income's not subject to tax. And so it's a valid concern, no doubt about it. There's something else that was asked. Yeah, Will from Kosciuszko. How much tax revenue will the new data centers make up? It's a great question. And again, here's where you've got to focus on the different types of taxes, categories of taxes, and who collects them. So in the case of these data center projects, the state negotiated an abatement of corporate income taxes, which still stands. Even if we pass this bill and eliminate the individual income tax, we still have a corporate income tax in the state. So in a way to compete with the other states and lure them into the state of Mississippi, it's pretty common. We abated the income tax for 10 years. Now, I don't know how much money that amounts to, because I don't really have a good feel for the profit, let's say, AWS would produce in the state of Mississippi. And remember, they're selling their services all over the world. Those services may originate and may be produced in the facilities, the buildings, literally in Madison County, but their consumers are all over the world. You on your phone, when you go tap an app, that likely is accessing digital assets that are stored somewhere on the planet. That's what the cloud is. It abstracts the physical from the virtual. You don't really know, don't care. You just want to tap the app and it works for you. And by the way the cloud architectures are implemented, this time when you tap the app, you may be accessing a data center in Australia, and next time you tap it, it's in Utah, just as an example. That's the way the applications are distributed. It's also why rarely does that stuff ever not available, because of the resiliency and the redundancy.
You're more likely to connect to Utah than Australia.
There's
but
no
it's
doubt.
Possible.
There's no doubt. But it depends on the traffic at that time. You know, there's all kinds of complicated technology behind the scenes that
it's trying to get you the closest location, because that will be the fastest speed.
That's right.
But if there's too much traffic at that closest location, then the speed would be lower than going to a more distant location that has less traffic, and it funnels it there.
That's right. And I remember,
and it does those computations millions of times a second.
It's algorithms built into the software, and I remember back in the 90s, when there was a couple of companies that introduced technology known as load balancers. And that's when you had a website. And the prevalent example we used to use in our world was Victoria's Secret had the very first online lingerie show. You may be surprised to find out it was overwhelmed, inundated with viewers. And this is long before, we're talking about back in the 90s, late 90s, I think, long before we had the pipe, the internet capacity we have today. And it crashed it.
It was 10 years before YouTube.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that. So
or close to it.
It crashed the site. And that's kind of gave rise to this concept of load balancers. And all that really meant was, wow, Victoria's Secret could publish, could stream that live event from multiple servers in multiple data centers and load balance between them. So somebody logs in, let's see, let me find the site that's got the least amount of traffic hitting it right now. Boom, you're being put over there. I mean, literally,
it's like
that was
opening new
technology.
registers at the Wally World
There
during
you
holiday
go.
season.
That's exactly right. So we're kind of in the weeds there, but back to the question from Will from Kosciuszko, the 10-year tax abatement. So that means the state government, which only has two primary forms of tax revenue, sales taxes, income taxes, they're getting an abatement for 10 years. They won't pay any income taxes to the state. On the other hand, because they are locating physically assets in the state subject to property taxes, ad valorem taxes, a massive amount, mind-boggling amount of property taxes because of the massive investment. You think about your house and the property taxes you pay, think about a $10 billion valued property and the property taxes due there. Now, it's true that in the negotiations, typically in these kinds of projects, economic developers would negotiate a fee, what's called a fee in lieu of, a FILO is the acronym used in economic development. It just simply means instead of paying the full amount of property taxes, if you come do this project here for some period of time, just pay us this much money, a fee, flat fee, set fee in the agreement. And that was negotiated. It's pretty typical for all these projects we bring in. And you may say, well, wow, why do we do that? Well, I tell you why. Because it's either get that amount of money or zero. There's no in between. They'll say, oh, okay, well, Alabama says they're willing to cut us a deal with a FILO, flat property tax. You guys won't bend on that? Nope, we're standing our ground. Okay, we're going to Alabama. So you get zero. So your choice is tens of millions of dollars or zero. There's no in between in the way that works. And the minute, I've said this before many times, the minute the other 49 states discontinue the practice of offering tax incentives to lure economic development projects, I'll be the first in line at the Capitol to eliminate that practice in the state of Mississippi. But as long as we're having to compete in that world, it's a very strong negotiating tool. And there's no way we land these projects without negotiating and including those provisions in the deal, in the structure of the deal. So the fact that AWS is coming to Madison County and Compass is coming to Lauderdale County directly, and that's important to keep in mind, directly, they won't be paying any income taxes to the state government. Indirectly, however, you think about their employees who are buying stuff, even if we eliminate the income tax, which generates sales taxes, but more importantly, the outgrowth from these projects, which I believe will lure more businesses and workers and employees in the state of Mississippi. And guess what they do? They buy houses and cars, which are all subject to ad valorem taxes. They buy stuff which generates sales taxes. That's how economic growth can power an economy and move us to the next level. Coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
Hey, this is Bob.
Covering the stories that matter most to Mississippians. Gerard Gibert. Middays with Gerard. SuperTalk Mississippi.
Try to be best, 'cause you're only a man, and a man's got to learn to take it. Try to believe, though the going gets rough, that you got a hand tough to make it.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Well studio. Mary in Greenwood says, why can't they say no federal or state taxes after 70, especially if you still work? I've been paying for 55 years. Give me a break, please. I hear you, Mary, but I would encourage you to consider the fact that we're running $2 trillion deficits. We have $36 trillion in debt at the federal level. Most people are understandably so concerned about inflation and really unhappy about the cost of living, which has risen fairly sharply in the last few years. It's driven by the deficits. And I understand the next typical response to that, as you know, Rhino, is, well, let's cut spending. Man, I'm all for it, so that we can reduce deficit. But then you get into a $6.5 trillion budget. Okay, where do we cut? Yes, the Doge Group has provided lots of ideas, but let's be honest, many of those ideas have been presented before. They're just kind of calling more attention to it. There's nothing new in that.
Well, the attention has been drawn to them in political conversations. I don't think many of their suggestions have ever really been presented to the voting public in any meaningful way.
Right. So let's talk about the state, where we have roughly a $7 billion budget. And, of course, what a lot of people say is, look, let's just eliminate the income tax today. Just cut spending to offset that. I'm all for that. And once again, I'll point out that the state auditor engaged an outside firm, a consulting firm, that specializes in reviewing the organizational structure, spending, efficiencies of state government, state agencies, and making recommendations to reduce spending and improve efficiencies. A third party was hired. They identified $350 million of potential cuts in a $7 billion budget. It's really not that much. That's 5%. Let's assume that 100% of that could be cut. All $350 million. To eliminate the income tax and balance the budget, you got to find another $1.7 billion. In other words, you got to find nearly 6.5 times what we paid a third party to identify what their findings were. 6.5 times. Should we hire them and say, look, we're not paying you until you find $2.2 billion worth of frivolous spending so that we could cut the income tax? Here's something that I predicted, and I've done the math on this, and I've seen some reports on this. Medicaid. You know, I've said that. I shouldn't say I told. I don't like that phrase. Slap me when I do that. I've shared on the show my concerns about the runaway cost of Medicaid. Now, I'm not talking about Medicaid expansion. I'm talking about the Medicaid program in place in the state of Mississippi. The minimum standard Medicaid is what we operate. And unfortunately, it's not even something you can budget. It's not like you can say, this is how much money you get. You're not getting a dime more. And here's why. And you're very familiar with this, Rhino, because you worked in that industry somewhat. Someone who is enrolled in Medicaid seeks medical treatment, services, pharmaceuticals, whatever's covered by Medicaid, to typical gambit of health care. And they seek that, they receive it. The provider of those services or the seller of those drugs sends a bill to Medicaid. And the federal government and the states pay the bill. you can estimate and get pretty close in predicting what that annual cost would be in advance when you're doing a budget, but you can't peg it to the penny.
No.
And if you go over, you got to pay. You can't tell the providers, oh, I'm sorry, we're out of money. And they'd say, okay, well, then I'm not providing any more medical services to the people on Medicaid. That pregnant woman over there that's about to pop a baby out that's covered under Medicaid, I'm sorry, they have to go to the street and have a baby. We're not going to do that in this country, despite what the left says. They describe that as happening. What did AOC say? They're bleeding in the parking lots and crap like that. No, that doesn't happen. They're crazy. They're lying about that. I think we're looking at a situation where right now we're enjoying a fairly handsome surplus in our state of about $400 million this year, fiscal year 25. It would not shock to see our budget for 2026 fiscal year, which they'll be hammering out later on in the session, show a deficit at the state level, necessitating significant cuts. Combine that with cutting tax revenues, and you got yourself a big old problem. We're stepping aside for a break. It's time for Fox News SuperTalk News. SuperTalk's Ben Milam at 1120, Douglas Carswell at 1205.
Hour of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by the Mississippi Business Journal. Visit msbusinessjournal.com. Scott Coopwood, publisher. And now, another hour of the talk that keeps Mississippi talking. Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Begin your transmission now.
Now on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone, to Middays, live from the Element Wealth studio on this
Friday, y'all.
All right, so we're just having a little fun here talking about taxes. I know people are saying, man, that's kind of boring, but this is going to affect your pocketbook, your wallet. It's real.
And speaking of that, we did have the question from Mary in Greenwood. She said, why can't they say no federal or state taxes after 70, especially if you still work? And I mentioned during the break that really what's in the control of the state, which is what we're talking about, the only thing that would help you if you're 70 and still working would be the elimination of the income tax.
Right.
Because then you get to take home more of what you're making.
Which is what this bill wants to do. This is what it proposes to do.
Which would be the no state tax that she mentioned. There's nothing we can do about the federal tax at the state level.
Yep. That's absolutely true. I'll offer to buy the government's 2 potted lemon trees to get the ball going on the C Spire tax line. Good question here. What about the use tax, Bob in Gulfport? So this is something that I have discussed personally with the Speaker of the House and Representative Trey Lamar. The original version of this bill did not include the 1.5% local tax on out-of-state purchases, retail sales. Only in-state sales taxes, not use taxes, which are levied on purchases from sellers that do not have a physical brick-and-mortar presence within the boundaries of the state. I consider that problematic. I am pleased to report that before the bill hit the floor in the House and ultimately passing the House, the use tax code in the state of Mississippi was pulled forward into the measure so that there could be a discussion about how to handle use taxes as the bill is again debated in the Senate. Should we go to conference, etc.? So it appears to me that the Speaker and Chairman Lamar felt like, yeah, we need to at least pull it forward so we can talk about it. So here's what that means, just in real simple terms. Let's say you buy, what's a common item folks buy? Household goods, I think, on Amazon. I do a lot. It's just so much more convenient. I buy soap, for example, or Windex, things like that. Cleaning supplies. You buy those on Amazon, you're paying 7% sales tax. Should this law, as drafted, be enacted? You buy it from the Walmart in your community or a small business, grocer, 8.5%. So there's a disparity. We had that a few years ago, as you recall, Rhino, when we enacted legislation that eliminated that disparity and required out-of-state retailers. Mainly it was because of the explosion of purchases from e-commerce sites, such as, Amazon's a common one that most people are familiar with. The explosion of that, and the state was losing out on sales tax revenue, but more importantly, it was giving them a competitive advantage versus those businesses located within the state because of the sales tax disparity. So that was addressed. Well, now it feels like we're reintroducing that disparity. It's not as wide a gap, but it's still a disparity. So I think that will ultimately be addressed. No doubt about it. Is there a separate tax on liquor and beer for the state of Mississippi? There is, and this is one of the reasons it generates a fair amount of revenue for the state. This is one of the reasons it's so hard to eliminate the Alcoholic Beverage Commission and in the state and get the state out of the business of distributing alcoholic products. Man, how many times has that been coming up in legislative sessions, Rhino? Every year for, it seems like 10. I'm sure it's on the boards again this year. But this is another situation where we've built our revenue model around all these various taxing structures, and in disrupting that makes it difficult to balance the budget. And there's been a lot of work done on how can we get out of the alcohol distribution business and still not reduce the revenues needed to operate the state. No doubt. And that's a big problem. On the federal level, says Louis from the 662, the big question is, why does it take about $4.5 trillion to operate our federal government yearly? I wish it were only $4.5 trillion. It's $6.3 trillion. You're off almost $2 trillion. I'm not trying to be condescending there, Louis. I just want to point out that it wasn't too long ago, like 2019, it was. And the simple answer is, and nobody wants to hear this, Rhino, it's Medicaid, it's Medicare, it's Social Security. Those off the chart rises over the last 5-6 years. Everything else, even though I know we point to all the wasteful spending, no doubt about it, really not up that significantly relative to the mandatory spending on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Population is aging, healthcare costs increasing dramatically, cost of living adjustments, and Social Security without more revenue coming in. All the above. That's what's driving our deficits, and we have a government, we have politicians who say, we ain't touching that. Okay, well then we don't have a whole lot to touch. We just passed a defense funding bill. Republicans in the House went to the Senate, control the House, went to the Senate. This was before Christmas, and then President Biden signed off on it. Increased spending on defense by $46 billion. $46 billion. Well, when you got a $36 trillion debt, $2 trillion in deficits, we're going in the wrong direction. Now, I believe, and I think you and I have talked about it many times, that there's certainly room to cut wasteful spending even in defense. Even President Trump has indicated we need to spend more money on defense. So we're not going to touch Medicare, not going to touch Social Security. Medicaid is on autopilot as well. Debt interest we have to pay. The minute we defaulted on paying the interest on the debt we've issued, the global economy would collapse. So all of that's off the table. We're increasing defense spending. That leaves us about 15% of the federal spending pie to manage. Eliminate every penny of that, and you still have a $1.3 trillion deficit. It's mind-boggling. Here in the state of Mississippi, again, the concern that I'm really worried about is Medicaid spending in base Medicaid. It just continues to rise. Cost of health care keeps going up. The CARES Act passed under President Trump, 2020. What was that, $2.1 trillion, I think, and that was for COVID relief. A whole bunch of provisions in it. Remember the PPP loans, remember the stimulus checks, the stimmy checks as they call it. I call it helicopter money. It also had a provision you don't hear a lot talking about, which increased the federal match to the states for Medicaid. The theory was you're going to have to treat a lot more sick people, and costs are likely to rise because remember that era, Rhino, when nurses were joining these traveling nurses organizations, and they're like doubling their pay. They're paying them $300,000 a year to travel around being nurses, and then they stop that and they come back and they go to the hospitals and say, okay, you're going to have to raise my pay. That's been going on the last 3 or 4 years. You're aware of that.
Oh, yeah.
That's a huge reason why the cost of care has continued to rise. But what that deal did, that provision did, that feature of the CARES Act from 2020 was it said, okay, states, we're going to give you more money for your Medicaid, but in exchange for that, you're not going to disenroll anybody, even if they're no longer eligible for Medicaid. So about a year or so ago, the Biden administration says, okay, in accordance with the CARES Act, we're now phasing out this enhanced match. You can start to disenroll people. Easier said than done. So because of what happened in 2020, we now are dealing with a situation where we got a lot of people that should have been disenrolled. Now the government says, okay, proceed, disenroll them. By the way, in the meantime, while you're doing that, we're cutting the amount of money we're spending to you. What does all that mean? What it means is that Medicaid spending at the state level is also increasing. It would not surprise to see the Division of Medicaid, when they're working with our legislature for their budget, request another $150, $200 million, even more, to operate the Medicaid program next year. Currently, we spend just under $1 billion at the state level and about $7+ billion at the federal level. Ben Milam is next.
The talk that keeps Mississippi talking.
We're rolling. Hit it. Go. Play it.
Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It is Middays from the Element Well studio. Appreciate you joining us today on this Friday, y'all, as Rhino likes to say. It's our pleasure to welcome now Ben Milam, multimedia journalist, SuperTalk Mississippi News.
Hey, Gerard, happy Friday.
What's up there, Big Ben?
Oh, man, just ready for the weekend. It's been a long week full of a lot of hard and soft news, just an action-packed week.
Yeah.
A lot of big stuff happening, of course, as you know, the inauguration. And I feel like we're going to talk about a lot of stuff here that people have probably heard about, but maybe we can give a few extra details. But, of course, the inauguration, as I just mentioned, and then you had the college football playoff title game. The Fighting Catholics went down. Sorry, Gerard. Ohio State wins the first 12-team college football playoff, and I would imagine this offseason there's going to be plenty of conversation about expanding that and how to tweak it with auto bids and all this kind of fun stuff. That's more of a sports talk thing this afternoon. But it was it kind of. Starting on Monday, you had these two massive things that happened, and the rest of the week, it just kind of hadn't slowed down at all.
Well, you left out the Snowmageddon.
And the Snowmageddon. Yeah, I'm telling you, you miss a few things when you're thinking about it with such a big news week. But, yeah, of course, our people in South Mississippi listening and that do tune in don't need to be told that this, was kind of a strange occurrence. It was a historic occurrence, and the National Weather Service still kind of working on some of these records to officially stamp them as records, but we do know it was some of the most snowfall in South Mississippi in over 50 years. Of course, in Louisiana, they do have some confirmed records. 10 inches in New Orleans. That ties a Louisiana record set back in 1895, 130 years ago. And then, of course, you just go about 80 miles to the east in Gulfport. Had about, I think, confirmed 6 inches, and that could grow. I think I'm really not sure of how that works, but they're still working to, I guess, measure that fully, compile records from different places on the coast. Again, not totally sure, but the record for that, just for inquiring minds, 7 inches in December of 1963 in Gulfport. So if we don't hit that record, we're going to be really, really close. 6.3 inches was the next closest in 1895. So we could hit that, or I guess that was the second most. And then 2 inches in March of 1993. So we smashed that. We completely obliterated that record. It is something that people who have lived on the coast for a very, very long time have not seen. And I think we're starting to get some meltage of snow, and it'll be warming up starting Saturday night, Sunday, and especially Monday and Tuesday. It'll start pushing towards the 50s and 60s. And so the roads will, of course, be safer to drive at that point. But, yeah, man, something that we really haven't seen. It's just kind of wild to see those pictures of the beach covered in snow. And we're up, here, and some of us in Jackson and, of course, in North Mississippi didn't see any snow other than maybe a few spot snow flurries. But, yeah, that was another historic thing that happened this week in the pile of things that happened over the last 5 or 6 days. And then in Tupelo, you had a 41-year record low in terms of temperature, just without the precipitation. Reached single digits for the first time since the early 1990s. And I'm kind of hoping 1984. I'm kind of hoping we're out of that bitter cold stretch. Usually we have one, maybe two. I'm hoping it's just one this year.
Man, seeing the video of folks in New Orleans on Canal Street, Rhino sent that to me, skating around. That's just crazy.
Yeah, and one of the coolest things that I saw, of course, they're just an abundance of videos and pictures. I have brothers that live in Baton Rouge, and they got around 9 inches too. That was the most since 1895 as well. Yeah. But on Bourbon Street, to see people having snowball fights and ice skating and all these things, just weeks after that terror attack happened in New Orleans, I thought it was a really cool picture of the resilience of those people and just Americans in general to be able to enjoy snow so soon after such a terrible thing happened, and can kind of take your mind off things a little bit when you see the white stuff falling down. Right?
Yeah. Totally. It was, I was up in Washington, all over the place up there as well. And
was it snowing up there when you were there?
It did on Sunday. Okay. We had some wintry mix precipitation, snow, sleet, freezing rain, etc., making the driving conditions quite treacherous and walking conditions as well.
Especially with open-toed shoes on.
Yes.
Yeah. And the driving conditions were already kind of restricted.
That's right. Yeah. Very much because of the security.
Yes.
So what about what's going on with Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, who had a hand in the nomination and then ultimately confirmation, I should say, of Senator Marco Rubio as Secretary of State?
That's right. She explained this on the Gallo Show earlier this week. But she kind of gave a behind-the-scenes look of how that worked. And, of course, after the inauguration, the cabinet picks for President Trump you started to see those move forward in earnest in terms of the confirmation votes. Marco Rubio was the first Trump's Secretary of State as the nation's chief diplomat, and he was unanimously confirmed. That is a relatively rare occurrence, especially in the last 5 presidential administrations, as we've kind of moved into this day and age of political rhetoric and bipartisanship, or partisanship, I should say. But 99-0 was the vote in the Senate to confirm Marco Rubio. And where Cindy Hyde-Smith comes in is, I think, precedence is usually that if you are being voted on as a senator for a potential nomination, you vote present. You basically abstain from the vote. But Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, said she's gotten to know Marco Rubio really well in their time working in the Senate together. And he asked her, should I vote for myself? He felt a little weird doing that. And she encouraged him to do that, to express confidence. Basically, if you're confident in your ability to do this job, your capacity to serve in this role, you should vote for yourself. And that he did. And so it was that vote of 99-0. Of course, the one missing was J.D. Vance, who is no longer serving in his Senate seat as the vice president. And then the other piece of Cindy Hyde-Smith news, Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, is she already has a challenger for 2026.
Yep.
Her seat will be up for contention. Ty Pinkins will be at least one of her Democratic challengers. He's obviously got to go through the primary phase, but he announced that he is set to run for a second consecutive statewide contention race. He, of course, ran against Roger Wicker in the general election in 2024. Roger Wicker won that by a pretty good margin, but Pinkins is, he initially ran for that statewide seat, Secretary of State, in 2023 after Sawaski Young dropped out of that race. And so he's kind of, I think, worked his way into top of mind for a lot of the Democratic leaders in Mississippi and nationally. And it'll be really interesting to see how the national DNC handles Pinkins in this race, because one of the things that Ty Pinkins talked about and kind of lamented was that he had a lack of support from the DNC as he was challenging Roger Wicker in 2024. And so we'll see if that changes. I don't know. You would assume it would be an uphill battle. Always is against an incumbent. But he would be, hypothetically, if he defeated Cindy Hyde-Smith, he would be the first Democratic U.S. Senator since John Stennis in 1989. So
part
that
of the
would
old
be
Blue Dog coalition back in those days. So.
That is right. Yeah, back in the old days. And he's hoping to get back to that seat and win one of these elections. He's had 2 really tough challenges in the past 2. And then Gerard, I wanted to mention, obviously you've been talking about it, but one of the things that's kind of been teased earlier this week is, there's obviously been a lot of talk about HB1. You were just talking about it. Mm-hmm. There have been conversations and kind of musings about whether the Senate would just kill this bill and come up with their own bill. Sounds like they're going to counter this with their own bill. And one of the things that is going to be addressed, this is per Senate Appropriations Chair Briggs Hobson, is that increased spending on Medicaid and some of those other things.
Okay.
So there you go.
So we've already heard about that.
That's right.
It was pretty predictable, but here's where we are. All right. Ben, appreciate you coming in with that update. Good recap.
Sure thing. Thanks, Gerard.
You bet. We're coming right back, folks, in the Element Wealth studio. Today at 12:05, it's Douglas Carswell. He's the president and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy.
Everybody ready?
I'm ready. Ready here.
Middays with Gerard Gibert on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Well, it's 8 o'clock in Boise, out of What's your name, little girl?
Welcome back today on In a Mississippi Minute with Steve Azar. You'll hear an interview with longtime public relations guru Jay Palmer. In a Mississippi Minute with Steve Azar is presented by Superior Catfish. Remember, there's catfish, then there is Superior Catfish. It's U.S. farm-raised catfish with homegrown flavor. Ask for it by name at your favorite store or restaurant. Go to superiorcatfish.com for more info. So, Mailman Clayton says, we're still dealing with the snow on my mail route. Wow, look at that photo he sent us there, Rhino.
Oh, yeah.
It's beautiful, but be careful there, Mailman. Man, I don't like to see them vehicles sliding all over the place on those icy, snowed-up roads. Saw a little bit of that up in Washington. They're more accustomed to it, of course. Normally what you see around the small towns were just standard passenger pickup trucks with the plow attachment on the front. That's usually, in the old days, I seem to recall it was more bulldozers with...
Yeah, or dump trucks.
Yeah, dump trucks, that's right, that had some juice behind them. And maybe they have to get those out when you got more serious accumulation.
Well, that's like in Florida. They have 11 snowplows, apparently, owned by the state.
Oh, okay.
And you have to imagine whoever suggested they get those in the Sunshine State probably got some mockery at the time when the suggestion came around, but probably grin like the Cheshire Cat now.
On the ceasefire text line, eliminate the income tax and institute a recreational cannabis tax. We would pioneer the southern market. Man, I think I talked about it. The aroma of cannabis is pervasive in the nation's capital. I felt like I was ingesting it even though I wasn't directly, especially riding on the Metro rail. Man, oh man.
Oh, yeah, I've got a friend that lives in D.C., and he was talking about on Election Day, it wasn't the last election, it was midterms, I think.
Yeah.
Where if you showed up to a dispensary or to a store and had the I voted sticker, they had a pre-rolled joint for you for free.
Gosh, dog it. Man, oh man. Just a little bit of the comments from the social media universe regarding HB1, the sweeping tax reform / income tax elimination bill, which has passed the Mississippi House and now is in the hands of the Mississippi State Senate. Here's the comment. No bait and switch. Fun purrs like we were promised. Let's see. Here's another one. If property sales or gas taxes will increase, then no! ! This would unfairly penalize those of us who are retired and have paid state income tax our entire working careers. We are already struggling to stay up with inflation. Yes, but don't play a shell game by increasing other taxes. Here's another one. Only if we can protect property tax from exploding as it has in Texas and Florida. Well, it hasn't exploded recently. It's been high in Texas and Florida because it's their primary source of income. I don't know how to reiterate that any more clearly. If you don't receive and collect taxes on income, you're going to get it somewhere. So the theory here, the premise of this legislation is by eliminating the income tax and allowing people to keep more money in their pocket, from doing so, that would increase revenues on sales taxes, and that would be sufficient to fund the government. Tate's Turf LLC says, run the state government like we run our businesses. There will be risk, but I believe the revenues will go up if we cut the income tax. Yeah, I love it, Tate, and I want to be clear. I am a proponent of eliminating the income tax, but I also believe that it must be done in a prudent, responsible, and financially viable method. Cold turkey gutting revenues to the state by $2 billion is irresponsible. And again, I know this is not something people are happy about, but the cost of the second biggest spending category in the budget that being Medicaid is going to go up, and it's going to continue to go up for a variety of reasons that we covered in the last segment. This is nationwide, by the way. This isn't unique to the state of Mississippi. Sure, the state of Mississippi could say, hey, we don't want to participate in the Medicaid program anymore. That means the state would lose out on roughly $7 billion of income from the federal government, which, by the way, goes directly to the healthcare industry. And this is not checks going into the pockets of people enrolled in Medicaid, which are the blind, the disabled, children in low-income households, the indigent elderly, low-income elderly. That's who currently qualifies for Medicaid. Of the 750,000 or so, 430,000 of them in Mississippi are children. So we could say no and reject the federal government's match. I even hate to predict what could happen to the healthcare industry in the state if that were to occur. I mean, it's not even reasonable to think about it. So it's a problem that state lawmakers must consider when we're talking about reducing revenues. The other thing, to the point from Tate's Turf here about, hey, if we eliminated the income tax, revenues would go up. It's not the same as the Laffer curve when we're talking about adjusting income tax rates. We still have an income tax, and income taxes are still producing revenue, but we're adjusting the rates to optimize and maximize revenues. Once you have fully eliminated, there are no rates to optimize. You totally lose that. You only then have one source, major source of revenue to the state, and that's consumption taxes, sales taxes. I'm for that. I like that. But think about this. Right now, we spend about $62 billion a year at the retail level in Mississippi to produce the sales taxes that power the general fund at the state level, along with, of course, the current income taxes collected. But if that's eliminated, we only have one program, one tax source, that being sales taxes. We spend about $62 billion. If we let everybody keep $2 billion, that's what 2.2 roughly, that's what income taxes are. We fully eliminate the income tax. We allow you to keep that $2.2 billion. Let's say you spend every penny of it on goods and services subject to the full 7% state sales tax. Not groceries, not cars, not houses, not investment, not paying down on debt. Every penny on sales, on transactions subject to the 7% sales tax. You can do the math. That's $145 million. So we lost $2.2 billion and we get $145 million left back. Well, that math doesn't work. You guys know that. So how much would we have to spend? Well, you can do the math there to make up the $2.2 billion. Now, I should also say that in accordance with this plan, we're keeping the diversion we currently send to the cities. So you got to tack on that $500-600 million as well. All right, so let's say it's $1.5 million is what we got to find. Well, we only got 1.4 if everybody spent every dime on stuff subject to 7%. So to get to that 1.5, we need to spend about $20 billion more. That's a third more you're spending than you are currently today to make up for the income tax revenue loss. Well, that's not going to happen. You don't have the money to do that. So the hope is we would attract lots of people into the state. And the same logic in the math formula would apply. We need to increase our population substantially, 25%, to make up the difference. And it depends on the income levels of the people you're bringing in. Probably not going to happen. The big concern, I think, that's not being considered in this whole debate is how do we cover the shortfall in revenue? That's not being considered. And I think just assuming that it will come from the economic growth, and I do believe it will spur economic growth, but assuming that will be sufficient to offset this loss of revenue, I think is a bit risky, and I think there may be some ways to deal with that and approach that. On the other side of the break, I'm going to share an idea I have about how to avoid increasing sales taxes, the 1.5% local option. That's coming up next.
Middays with Gerard.
Good for America. Good for fans of justice and truth. Good for us.
SuperTalk Mississippi.
This is what we stand for.
How I wish you were here. We're just two lost souls swimming in a fishbowl, year after year, running over the same old ground. And have we found the same old fears? Wish you were here.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays. So I know we've been talking about this tax bill quite a lot, and maybe some eyes are glossing over at all those details, but it's going to affect your pocketbook. And you know what often happens, Rhino, is we have a tendency to just conduct our daily lives and don't really pay a lot of attention to stuff going on in the nation's capital, in our state capital. And then when it happens and it's enacted and you see your paycheck change, what the heck? And that's, I think, a common sequence that we see a lot. Before we went to break, there's been a lot of complaints, I guess, and grousing about, man, okay, you're going to eliminate the income tax over 10 years, but you're going to raise sales tax on certain categories of goods by 1.5% July 26, but you're going to reduce sales tax on groceries down to the net will be 6% initially, the state portion 4.5, the municipal portion 1.5, total of 6. So a total of 1% savings on groceries with a 1.5% increase on everything else, 5% new tax on fuel. Here's something to keep in mind. The 1.5% local layer of tax there, all of which is collected, stays in the city or county where the transaction occurred, is automatic unless the city and county governments opt out. It's similar to the way the medical marijuana program, Rhino, worked when it pretty much made it such that the sale of medical marijuana, the dispensaries, could be located in any city or county unless the city or county proactively voted to opt out. We're talking about the government, not the people. The people could initiate a referendum within the city or county to override the decision made by the city or county government. Under this program, this tax program, it's automatic, but if the city or county government, whatever the form of government is in your municipality, city council, board of aldermen, mayor, etc., supervisors at the county level, but if they vote to not impose and to opt out of the 1.5%, you don't have it. So I would suggest to folks to go to their county and city government and say, look, we don't want our sales taxes going up, so please opt out. And I know William in Tupelo says, you know damn well they're not going to opt out. Okay, well, you vote for them, William. They're your elected officials. Go vote for some people that would do that. That's how
whose ear would it be easier to bend? Your local council member or alderperson or your state representative?
Right. Donald in Kokomo says we need to find a way everyone pays their fair share in taxes. We that pay income tax and land taxes versus those who don't represent a large gap. Don't forget about the cash workers. They pay no income tax and hide their wages and partake in free government programs. Welfare programs are way over abused and needs to be cut somehow. Define fair share. I feel like I'm having to repeat the same question that I often do to the Democrats who say, and I'm not suggesting that about Donald, but that's the question they ask all the time. We need to pay their fair share.
And the conservative answer is consumption tax.
Yeah, that's right.
No tax on income, no tax on property you own. The only taxes collected are taxes on sales.
Taxes in this country, income taxes, are progressive. The more you make, the higher is the rate, the more you pay. I won't go through all the gory details about the actual tax environment at the federal level, where the top 1% pay more than the bottom 90%, yet the Democrats say, that's not fair. Okay. It's ridiculous on the surface to start with. And it is true. We have a huge underground cash economy. I've made the point that it's one of the reasons that we have these twisted, I think, totally inaccurate statistics about people that work in our state. We have a huge unbanked population, the most of any state. We have a lot of people that work in the underground cash economy that don't want folks to know they're working, honestly. And yeah, we can impose a consumption tax. That's what Donald says, what Rhino said. Just keep in mind that if we wanted to totally convert to a consumption tax and thus eliminate the income tax as a way to offset most of that revenue.
You're looking at sales tax being about a quarter on the dollar.
Correct. And that, by the way, at the federal level, still produces a deficit, still doesn't allow us to balance the budget, and it still has some progressive characteristics in that we have these crazy prebates. It's not exactly what you think. At the state level, it would mean that the sales tax would have to be much higher than 8.5%. It's a tough deal. We're going to take a break for Fox News Super Talk News. Douglas Carswell then.
And now, the talk that keeps Mississippi talking.
That's what I like to listen to.
You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert. Here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Winter is here again, oh Lord. Haven't been home in a year or more. I hope she holds on a little.
Welcome back, everyone. It's hour 3, the afternoon portion of Middays. We are live in the Element Wealth studio on this
Friday, y'all.
Now it's our pleasure to welcome Douglas Carswell. He is the president and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. Good to see you there, Douglas. Thanks for coming in.
Hey, Gerard. Great to be on your show again.
So we are smack dab in the middle of the session, and I know this is something that you are constantly tuned into, paying attention to the measures being drafted and providing some input and some influence on what those policies and those bills look like as they are drafted.
We try.
Yeah, the big one, of course, HB 1. We've been talking about it today.
Yep.
That is a measure which has passed the House, been transmitted down the hall to the Mississippi Senate.
Yep.
It would, of course, phase out the individual income tax over a 10-year period in the state, and it has some other provisions for offsets and making the municipalities whole with the reduction of the grocery tax, trying to get more money for roads and bridges. You're familiar with all the provisions. What's your take on that at this point?
We love it. We love the idea of passing a bill in 2025 that will pave the way for the eventual elimination over 10 years of the state income tax. We already see the effect of the previous cut in income tax down to a flat 4%. All this massive inward investment coming into Mississippi is because of those tax cuts a couple of years ago. So this is really, really exciting, really great. There are a couple of caveats, a couple of things about the bill that I would say maybe we need to discuss this. Maybe we should think again. part of the bill front loads some tax increases so that in 2026, I think I'm right in saying it would raise revenue through fuel tax by about 500 million. And so it slightly front loads some tax raising measures. But, good conservatives, I think, can sit down and make this work. I don't think it's a reason not to do it.
Okay. Yeah, there are some concerns about the fact that the sales tax adjustments, 3 categories there, the 1.5% additional local tax on non-grocery transactions and reduction of the grocery sales tax on groceries, and then the application of a 5% sales tax on fuel. Those are the 3 things that would kick in July 26th. But one of the things I think we have to keep in mind to promote as part of this plan, Douglas, is that we already are still reducing the income tax rate by virtue of the measure passed in 2022. Yep. So if one were to look at their income taxes for 2024, because everybody's getting their data and their information together to prepare their tax return, income's taxed at 4.7%, 24, 4.4 now, 4. So we got to talk about that.
Kudos to Tate Reeves and to Speaker Gunn for actually doing this. I mean, the effects of this aren't just felt when you fill in your tax returns this year and you see you individually are given a tax break. Yeah. We can see the effects with all this inward investment. It's because of what Reeves and Gunn have done, and they should be, cheered for it. Well done them. It really is. It's making Mississippi part of the Southern success story. But we could go further. Now, here's the thing. Income tax currently raises about $2 billion.
Yep.
Now, we have a surplus of about 700 million. So do the math. How do you get to a stage where you eliminate, in effect, 2 billion of revenue? The only 2 ways you can do it are to control spending over the long term incrementally and to boost growth. And if you can do that, you can make the math add up. But you can't magically do it away. You can't do it in a year or 2. You mustn't rush to do it. But you can pass the legislation now that will allow costs to be controlled incrementally so that costs aren't rising at the same rate that the economy is growing, and you can unleash economic growth. If you do that, we could be a no income tax state in 10 years. That is a phenomenal, phenomenal goal to aim for.
Yeah, so you're right. The actual income tax revenue, looking at the 2025 budget, it's about $2.1 billion and change, just over $2 billion. The original surplus that was projected based on the revenue, sine die revenue estimate and the spending estimate, it came in at about $600 million. However, we are falling below the sine die revenue, actual revenue versus estimate. So I think, and then we got the 2% set aside. So I think when all that's said and done, it's going to put us at about $450 million, which is still significant. What I'd like to see happen, perhaps, is let's go ahead and get something positive going right away. Let's reduce the sales tax on groceries. Affects everybody. Let's make that effective July 1, 2025. I've shared this idea with the speaker, by the way, just to get people in the mindset of, hey, this is a good plan.
I'm not against that. Just a couple of words of caution. Okay. There are some in the Mississippi legislature, believe it or not, who are not too keen on giving you, Mississippi listeners, back their money. No doubt. So what they want to do to try and distract you with this distraction strategy is to play the game of saying, we're going to give you back some of your money on groceries, which seems like a big deal, but isn't. It's a distraction strategy. So we need to be super wary of people in the Mississippi legislature who talk about grocery tax reductions as a distraction against real tax cuts.
Okay. Yeah, and so I agree with you. I'm just suggesting to amend the bill as is to change the timing of that provision, but still keep everything else in place.
Yeah, I mean, Trailer Mar's super smart. They had this wonderful open day. I think it was in November. There were like 500 people from across Mississippi, and most of them were kind of non-politicos, so ordinary citizens, and they had this fantastic discussion about what to do. I think they'll be hearing this from all sorts of people. They're super, good conservatives can figure this out. They can improve the bill. Okay. It needs to be improved. But let's not allow perfection to be the enemy of the good.
No doubt about it. And in my conversations with the speaker, he said, we got a long way to go, as you know, and keep the ideas coming. And I think you're well aware the final form of the bill will look somewhat different than what is passed the House, and that's the way the lawmaking works.
Yeah, when Reagan passed his great tax reform proposals, the end product was different to how it started.
Oh, no doubt.
And
we've
got our own version of Reagan, I think, in the House now.
Yeah, good deal. So let's talk about taxes at the federal level, and you know where I'm going with that. We got the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the so-called Trump tax cuts passed in 2017. The individual provisions of that law scheduled to sunset at the end of this year. It means if we don't either renew or extend, and my preference, make them permanent, then everybody's taxes are going up effective January 26th. In less than a year, my concern, Douglas, is that the 435 in the House and the 100 in the Senate, even with Republican majorities, are not going to get their act together and get this done in a short period of time.
It's wafer thin, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really
Can't
is.
lose a single vote in the House of Republicans.
And I think the Senate is looking a bit like the House was, on a knife edge. I hear rumors that there might be some people who join the Republicans, but the Republicans in the U.S. Capitol have this extraordinary ability to shoot themselves in the foot. So let's wait and see. But people don't want their taxes going up. We need to make sure that they get their act together. But fundamentally, the U.S. government is heading towards a fiscal crisis unless it addresses its overspending. And, there's this talk about mask and Doge and reducing the size of government spending. That has to be done. That absolutely has to be done. If that doesn't happen, America will, I'm afraid, end up like Argentina was over a period of 20, 30 years of basically devaluing its currency and defaulting on its debt. And America can't allow that to happen.
Yeah. Which led to, as you well know, outrageous, we're talking multi-digit inflation.
And it hammered the middle class. The middle class in Argentina was decimated.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah. So, and as you well know, deficit spending is what leads to inflation. It's what devalues the dollar because we have to print more money to keep up with the debt.
The biggest threat to U.S. power today is not China. It is not Russia. It is not Islamism. The biggest threat to U.S. power today is the national debt because that is what historically always destroys great powers. And Musk understands this. We've got to get control of federal spending.
Hopefully we'll get some serious work and serious action, Ed. You've likely seen a lot of the proposals and a lot of the discoveries they have made on some of the crazy spending that's going on. My concern, of course, is that there's not as much focus on what I believe are the true drivers of our deficits and thus our debt, and that's the mandatory programs of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. There's a lot of wasteful spending in all three of those programs. So beyond that, even cutting the waste, you're still dealing with automatic increases just because the cost of running those programs goes up.
A fundamental part of the problem is until the 1930s, there was basically a single unified committee in the House that decided the budget.
Yeah.
What's happened is that different committees, if you go out to a restaurant and everyone can run up a bit of the bill and not have to be responsible for it, what happens? You've got to reform the way Congress sets the budget. You've got to have a unified committee that once again controls government spending.
Man, that'd be a sea change of the way we operate now, no doubt. If you can hang around, we keep talking.
Love to.
We've got Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy in the Element Well studio, coming right back.
Interrupt this program.
Gerard Gibert.
Here we go.
This is huge. Huge news. Huge news. Huge.
You need to listen to this.
Middays with Gerard. SuperTalk Mississippi.
We're back with you in the Element Well studio. We're visiting with Douglas Carswell. He is the president and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. So just trying to size up the objections to HB 1, the bill from the House, Mississippi House, that would eliminate the income tax. The retired folks in the state of Mississippi are particularly concerned because they don't currently pay income taxes. Retirement income, specifically in Mississippi, is exempt from taxation. they see these other adjustments in sales taxes as generally increasing their taxes. What do you say to them, to the retired people? How do you sell it to them?
I think the biggest taxation that retired people in Mississippi have been forced to pay over the past few years is called inflation. That is a tax on ordinary people. When the value of the dollar declines, you go into a grocery store, it's not even the tax on the groceries that really clobbers you. It's the fact that thanks to Joe Biden's economics, you've been taxed through inflation.
Sure.
So there is a real problem here. But look, I think you need to recognize that if we want to have a prosperous state, you need to shift the burden of taxation away from taxing work onto taxing other things, those other things being maybe consumption or property or whatever it is. And that means you're going to have to cut taxes on income. If you don't have an income, you're not going to be as prime a beneficiary of that as a family on income. But I would hope that many people who aren't going to benefit from cuts in the income tax because they themselves don't have an income would at least recognize it's helpful to their children and their grandchildren who are at the stage they were at 20, 30 years ago. So, I mean, I think this is good for Mississippi overall. But yeah, I recognize that the benefits of this will not be evenly distributed, and I think we need to be honest about that.
Okay. All right. So there's more, and I think that's the way, honestly, to describe it and define it. It is you have to look at the more holistic benefit value but people by human nature focus on what does it mean to them.
Of course, and they're legitimate and right to do that.
Sure, absolutely. All right, let's turn our attention to another high-profile policy issue in the state of Mississippi. And that's education choice, school freedom.
This is actually our number one issue, and I am super excited to see a couple of really interesting bills. Jansen Owen has a wonderful bill which would give people, in effect, public-to-public school choice. It means that every family in Mississippi could have the choices that, as of last year, active military service families could. If you're in a public school and you want to switch to a different public school, provided there's capacity in that school, you can make the move. I think it's wonderful. I think it's great. Really exciting. There's also a great bill by Rob Robertson, the chairman of the Education Committee we're hugely excited about, HB 1433. This would allow a limited form of public to private school choice. Sadly, it would only be in DNF-rated districts. But basically, if you're in a DNF-rated district and you weren't happy with your public school, you could take a portion of the overall funding to a private school. We think that would be super, super exciting.
So we interviewed the lieutenant governor a couple of weeks ago, and we discussed this very issue. And he's not necessarily a huge fan, I think it's the way to put it, of any sort of school choice policy. And this is something I've been working with him on for over a decade now, honestly. Mm-hmm. Here's a question. I haven't read either of those bills, but I knew they were coming. I haven't dug into them yet. DNF-rated districts or schools?
I believe it's districts.
There are only 3.
Well, it's DNF rated at some point in the past 5 years.
Okay.
So that's my understanding. Now, but even then, you're right.
It's in arrears.
It's not nearly widely. It's not nearly extensive enough. I get that. But look, we've been pushing, as you said, for this for years. We've got nowhere. This would be a great step forward if we could do it.
Because he sort of interchanged district and school in our discussion. I also interviewed Senator David Blunt, the Democrat, that pretty much opposes most school choice provisions.
You mean the senator who sent his own kids to private school? I always find it really rich
when personally attended private school.
When people who send their own kids to private school come out against school choice, I think America and Mississippi deserve to know. I mean, there's a word for that. It's called hypocrisy, and I think it needs to be called out, Gerard.
He I'm pretty sure, is also a graduate of Jackson Preparatory School, if I'm not mistaken.
A wonderful school. A wonderful school.
Yes.
I want every family in Mississippi to have the opportunity to choose a school as good as Jackson Prep.
Sure. So the point I'm making is I have concerns, I suspect you do as well, about the methodology used in rating our schools.
Yeah.
I don't think it is necessarily an accurate reflection of the performance of the schools. We only have 3, 2 Fs and 1 D.
It has all the efficacy of Soviet tractor production targets. These are meaningless bureaucratic statistics.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is a difference, and that's why I'm glad you cleared that up. I haven't read the legislation yet proposed by Representative Robertson, drafted by him, but there is a difference between the school and the district. So, for example, Jackson Public Schools, right nearby here, a number of schools, I think the biggest school district in the state, I think it's presently rated at the district level as a C, but there are F schools within the district.
Yeah.
So if it's restricted to the district rating, that's a different situation than if it's at the school level.
Totally. It's far from the perfect bill,
okay,
but it would be a hugely significant step forward. Look, I think a really important thing to do is draft legislation that reassures people that school choice is not going to mean floods of the wrong kids coming into their neighborhood. So I would like to see really tough safeguards so that the school district defines capacity. I've heard the Lieutenant Governor say that, and I think he's absolutely right to say that. I would love to see the legislation amended to make sure that that is addressed. I think it's also really important that the schools have the power to exclude children on the basis of a history of disciplinary problems. Okay. You've got to give families in Madison and Clinton and DeSoto County absolute assurance that school choice is not going to mean that the quality of their good districts is eroded. This is about changing what isn't working in failing school districts, not exporting those problems into what is working.
Okay, because you're well aware of that. That's a common and widespread objection.
And people need to be able to have the conversation openly and honestly, and we need to address it. It's a legitimate concern, and people need to be able to articulate those fears and have those addressed in legislation. Okay. We need to make sure that school choice does not mean the wrong kids flood into successful school districts, and we're determined to make sure that happens.
You've looked at the Arkansas model, I'm sure, and so they kind of phased it in where there was a limit on the number of ESAs, essentially. And I think last year it was like 14%, as I recall. And this year it's wide open. Everybody that has a student that is of that age receives a voucher or an ESA in some amount, even those whose children have historically and currently attending private school. Is that something you'd like to see happen in Mississippi? Universal school choice, as you know, is how that's referred to.
Eventually, absolutely. I mean, you talked about trying to persuade some politicians about school choice over the previous years. The real game changer is Mississippi is now surrounded on three sides by school choice states.
That's right.
You've got Arkansas. Alabama just launched their school choice program and opened it up and was way oversubscribed. In fact, I think on the opening day, their website crashed. It was so popular. Louisiana, a little behind. They've only just passed the legislation, but they're going to allow school choice. If you were to do something similar in Mississippi, it would be a game changer. It would be an absolute game changer. You need, ultimately, public to private school choice. But let's start with public to public school choice and this pilot program in DNF-rated districts. Let's take the win. Let's pass this legislation. And let's reassure people that it's not going to be the end of the world. It's going to improve public education in Mississippi where it needs to be improved. It's not going to take away what's good and what works.
And that's something we really do need to clarify, I believe, Douglas, is that to the opponents of school choice, there's no intention on the part of school choice proponents to harm anything that's working.
Of course, I mean, there are two opponents of school choice. There are those who have legitimate concerns. They look at their wonderful school district, they look at the fact they pay local taxes, and they want reassurance that their taxes aren't going to be misused, that they're not going to get lots of kids from outside coming into their school district. And those legitimate concerns need to be addressed. Then I'm afraid to say there are the vested interests, the people who frankly like the fact that school superintendents have large salaries, often higher than the governor. And we need to differentiate between legitimate concern, often from parents who need reassurance, and those who frankly want to carry on the bureaucratic bondoodle we've got at the moment. And we need to recognize there are legitimate concerns about school choice we need to address, and there are also those frankly who are opposed to it because, frankly, they're on the same side as Joe Biden.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And of course, Joe Biden is strongly supported by the teachers' unions, and which are much more powerful in other parts of the country than they are here, but they have very outspoken opponents of this because it interferes with their little gig, and they don't want that. But I think, before we go, I think we've got a good chance of getting the legislation you talked about, the public-to-public, with some degree of restrictions on capacity, disciplinary, and then the rating of the school. I think we got a chance of getting that through the Senate as well.
I'm really optimistic. There are good people in the Senate Senate who I think are coming around.
I think so, too. Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of Mississippi Center for Public Policy, has been our guest. Always good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much.
We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
Gerard Gibert. Going beyond the headlines, breaking down the stories that matter to Mississippi. Middays with Gerard on SuperTalk Mississippi.
I recall when I was small, how I spent my days alone. The busy world was not for me, so I went and found my own. I would climb the garden wall with a candle in my hand. I'd hide inside a hole of rock and sand.
We're back with you in the Element Wealth studio. Thanks so much for joining us. Doesn't sound like he's from Jackson, maybe Natchez or Vicksburg, says CC in Senatobia, of course, referring to Mr. Douglas Carswell, President, CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. He is from across the pond, of course, a native of the UK. Bub and Starble says Delbert will never sign HB1 with the proposed income tax elimination plan. Well, I think what we're going to see out of the Senate, and it's not just Delbert, I think there's some concerns among senators, just in having casual conversations with them about the plan. And I think what we're going to see is a proposal, a measure drafted by senators. I'm not sure whom exactly, if that's coming from Senator Harkins, the Senate Finance, or Senator Hobson. Could be multiple senators. Hobson, of course, chairs Senate Appropriations. We'll see what happens there. I think what we're likely to see is one that has many of the same features and provisions, but perhaps phases out the income tax to a point, and not totally down to a terminal rate of 0%, but sort of to a point to kind of see how it's going. And then if everything's working out, the legislature could act and continue elimination. Again, the question that I still want to see answered is, how do we make the budget work with less revenue coming in? Where are the spending reductions? And given that it looks like Medicaid is going to request a significant amount of additional money to meet our obligation to receive federal money, already is a cause for concern. More than 50% of our spending in the state is on education. Other states around us, once again, have increased teacher pay, and that possibly could spur the legislature into some discussion of responding with an increase in Mississippi teacher pay. Of course, we've talked extensively about the number of school districts in the state and duplicative spending in the back office at the district level. What we figure we had 140 school districts or something to that effect. We have 82 counties. We looked it up. There is a measure that has been filed in the Mississippi House that would require that the counties reduce the school districts down to one per county. That means if there are multiple districts in a county, usually that's because there's a separate school district for a city, a municipality in a county.
Yeah, it's HB 1431.
Is that Representative Robertson? See the principal author there? Yeah. It makes sense. He would be, of course, chair of the Education Committee.
To provide that from and after July 1st, 2026, all municipal, separate, consolidated, line consolidated, and special municipal school districts in each county shall be abolished and joined for administrative efficiency.
Okay. So that means that we would have a consolidation effort underway, and there's a date on affixed to it, right, including the bill by which this would have to occur. 28, I think. Is that what you see?
July 1, 2026.
6. Okay, I'm sorry. I overheard some reps talking about it in the halls of the Capitol yesterday. I apologize. So it would have to be implemented? Total consolidation would have to occur by July 1? Or they would start the process July 1, begin the process, terminating the process where we would be reducing the districts down to 82, one per county. I thought by sometime in 28, maybe June 30th, 28, into the fiscal year.
The only date I keep seeing underlined, which is how you delineate the new legislation, keeps saying July 1, 2026. I mean, there's 40 some odd pages of yet to go through, but yeah.
I can't imagine that that's practical, that we have a year and 4 months, essentially 5 months, to undertake what is a pretty significant effort and a lot of work to consolidate these school districts. A year and a half, essentially, to do that. Man, that's aggressive, to say the least. But nonetheless, that would, in fact, reduce the number of districts in the state to one per county, total of 82. That is a very dicey and politically charged process, certainly in many counties where you've got separate school districts, county school districts, and we also have the issue of school boards. So each district, of course, has a school board of members elected that govern each district. What happens there? Which board? How do they consolidate and merge the boards? You know, is it full elimination of one and the other survives? Do they sort of work it out and combine? I don't know what the legislation says or if it even specifies that. Maybe those boards just have to call each other and talk about that. I don't know. But you can see the complexities associated with combining the boards that run the districts. Now, I know this happened in Oktibbeha County not so long ago, right? We merged Oktibbeha and Starkville school districts together. What have been the results? What are the grades of the single district for Oktibbeha County as opposed to the two, one for Starkville and one for Oktibbeha? DeSoto County has had a single school district for quite some time, but DeSoto County has also experienced explosive growth over the last 25 years for a variety of reasons. So a lot of schools have sprouted up and grown with having only that one district, which was established when the county was a whole lot less populous and you had fewer schools. But you can.
From what I can tell, the deadline would be July 1st, 2026.
Wow. That's incredible. Okay. Well, I misunderstood when I heard the reps talking about it yesterday.
There are some provisions as far as elections of school board members and stuff that include the date 2028, but unless I'm just not reading this correctly, the deadline for consolidation into countywide school districts would be set July 1, 2026.
Okay. So there are, I'm quite sure, and I've heard it in my own county, for example, of Madison. This is a very contentious and unpopular issue, and it's because you have an A district in Madison County and you have a low-performing district in Canton Public Schools, and this would merge the two, put them together, and that causes a lot of angst and concern. You've got numerous other examples. I don't know that I could think of them all sitting here, Rhino. Forest County may be one. You've got Hattiesburg, Forest County, Petal, I believe, in that county that would come together. Hinds County, the biggest. You got Clinton Public Schools, very high quality, high performing, would merge in with Jackson Public Schools and Hinds County Public Schools. I'm sure there would be some pushback from that one. Harrison County is another one. You got Harrison County schools, and don't we have separate Biloxi and Gulfport school districts, I believe? And they would have to join and combine. So the idea, I think, is great in that there's no doubt you would eliminate a lot of duplicate back office administrative costs. I've said many times it's really not practical to expect, oh yeah, we just cut every dime of the second district when we fold them into one. But no doubt it provides opportunity to cut expenses because a lot of that back office overhead, which is replicated and duplicated, would go away. No doubt about that. So this is aggressive, and I think you need to. I think you need to commend the House for stepping out there at a minimum, right? Because you know that once their constituents, the reps' constituents, find out about this, depending on where they are, there's going to be some pushback. They're going to get an earful. I'm hearing it in Madison County already. Oh my gosh, it's people are really concerned and upset about this. In some other counties where the demographics, shall we say, are more homogeneous, you know what I mean there's less objection when there's a striking contrast in the demographics. But more importantly, you got an F that's in the same district with an A or a B, or it's a D with a B or something like that. That may get some pushback as well. Coming right back with the final segment.
Hey, this is Bob, and if
Gerard Gibert, he keeps his classified documents right where they belong. Inside a Journey record jacket from the 1980s. Gerard Gibert, SuperTalk Mississippi.
Back with you in the Element Well studio. So, question: what about counties with 2 county seats? Would those districts have to combine? According to our interpretation, you're reading it there, Rhino, of the legislation, the goal in the bill would dictate that there would only be 82 school districts in the state, equaling 1 per county. Right? That's the end result.
I haven't completely digested all 50 pages of it, but just looking at the top half of it I got through, there were provisions for if a school district doesn't include a high school as to what the votes are on the school board. I mean, it looks pretty granular and detailed.
Yeah. Greg in Newton says there's 3 districts in the little county of Newton. And that's what makes this hard, is that every county's different. That sounds to me like, Greg, they're a perfect candidate, right, of school district consolidation. Hard to believe that the enrollment in Newton is such that one back office, one district, and district apparatus couldn't manage and administer every student and every school in the county. I agree. You get into Hinds, like I was saying, and Madison, Rankin County, where you've got Rankin County School District and Pearl separate school district is another one. It gets a little more dicey. That's the only point I'm trying to make. A little more complicated. Not anything that couldn't be sorted out and worked through. But every situation in every county is different in that regard. Now, I'll add this too. Pike County is a great example on the C Spire text line. I'm not really sure how many districts do we have in Pike. What's the bill number there, Rhino, that we're being asked there?
Let me go find it again.
Yeah. Makes me think of studies in the past that show where neighborhood schools work best. We could be taking good little schools and making a big conglomeration mess for students and individual learning to save money. We're not talking about combining schools. We're talking about districts. So what's the number there?
House Bill 1431.
Thank you. Lauderdale County would be very heated. Okay. I'm sure that would be the case in many. I haven't analyzed all 82 counties to kind of see what the dynamics look like there to try to guess at how much contention there would be over the measure. I was going to point this out. While I certainly understand and appreciate that the primary goal here is to improve efficiencies and reduce costs, man, I'm all for that. And that makes perfect sense. We've stated that as much on the show numerous times in the past. I would like to see more inclusion in these measures of what results we expect to achieve through passing any legislation, honestly. So again, if all we're doing is passing legislation that combines school districts, and yeah, that saves some money, how does that translate into benefit for Mississippians? How does that translate into improving the quality of life and the standard of living in our state? That's something that needs to be considered. And I'm not saying that this doesn't do that, but here's the thing. We do this, right? And then we walk away from it, and it gets implemented. Does anybody come back like 2-3 years later on some interval and say, hey, what are the results? And present that?
Very rarely.
No, it doesn't happen. That's the point. In business, I promise you, you're doing that. Wait, you made that sweeping decision, and it hasn't yielded any benefit? You're an idiot. You're not qualified to run this company. But we don't do that in government. We never go back, and I know I pounce on this all the time. We never go back and say, that change we made, what were the end results? What benefit did that, measurable benefit did that reduce? I can look at the Trump tax cuts and refute the talking points from the Democrats. It blew a hole in the deficit. No, the revenues went up. That's quantifiable. We need the same thing here. How will this affect the state? Not saying that saving money is not providing benefit, but how does that translate into improving the quality of life? Does it mean, hey, we could cut the taxes quicker? Okay, I do think there's benefit there. But that needs to be included. And we need to have some measuring apparatus that's dictated and specified in the legislation that requires the legislature to go back and apply those metrics and measurements and publish those so the people know that the actions they took are providing meaningful, measurable, quantifiable benefit. Out of here today. Have a great weekend. Back with you again Monday. Stay safe and God bless everyone.
SuperTalk Mississippi Media Production.